The Whitman house hadn't changed much since Julia left for college over a decade ago. The same crisp white shutters, the garden her mother tended with military precision, the faint scent of lavender that clung to the air like a memory. She had come home to surprise her mother for Mother's Day, planning to gather old photographs and stories for a heartfelt tribute video. What she didn't expect was to trip over a crack in the family's perfect foundation. It began innocently enough, a dusty photo album here, a forgotten shoebox there. But then, while rummaging through the far corner of the attic, she noticed an old trunk half covered with a moth-eaten quilt. Something about it felt out of place. Unlike the other boxes, marked with masking tape and labeled in Caroline's neat handwriting, this one was sealed shut, bound with an old leather strap. On top, barely visible beneath the dust, were the initials. A W. Curiosity prickled at Julia's skin. She hesitated. Her mother was notoriously private, even secretive. But this felt like something no one was ever meant to find. She unfastened the strap and pried open the lid. Inside, time had folded itself into silence. A hospital bracelet yellowed with age, a birth certificate with faded ink, and a bundle of delicate letters tied together with a silk ribbon. There were no photos, no keepsakes, just a sense of something precious, or damning, hidden away and forgotten. Julia's eyes locked on the birth certificate. The name wasn't hers, the date wasn't hers, but the surname Whitman was unmistakable. Her heart began to pound as if her body had caught on before her mind had time to process it. She sank to the attic floor, the silence thick and heavy around her. Questions began to flood in, ones that didn't yet have answers, but already threatened to change everything she thought she knew about her mother and herself. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a doorway, and whatever lay beyond it, Julia had just taken her first irreversible step through. Julia sat at the kitchen table long after the attic dust had settled on her clothes and in her lungs. The birth certificate spread out before her like a ghost laid bare. The paper was thin, creased at the corners, and stained by time. But the details were unmistakable. Name, Ava Whitman. Date of birth, April 29th. Just 11 months before Julia's own birth date. Mother's name, Caroline Margaret Whitman. Father's name, unlisted. Julia blinked. Once. Twice. It didn't change. Her mind clawed for logical explanations. Was this a cousin no one talked about? A stillborn baby whose memory had been locked away in grief? But the date made everything murky. Too close, too deliberate, and the last name, that was no coincidence. Her mother had always told her she was an only child. There were no siblings, no second bedrooms growing up, no shared birthdays, no when you were little stories that involved anyone but Julia. So then why did this certificate exist? Who was Ava Whitman? She flipped the document over as if the back might hold some magical key, a scribbled note that would undo the confusion and make this all make sense. But it was blank, like the story Caroline had never told. Julia's hands trembled. She reread the name Ava again and again, the syllables beginning to echo like a whisper through her memory. Had she ever heard it in passing? A mispronounced name on a voicemail? A slip of the tongue? Her chest tightened. This wasn't just a forgotten name or a misfiled paper. This was deliberate. It was hidden. And it was real. Julia knew her mother, knew her well enough to understand that nothing in Caroline Whitman's world happened by accident, which meant whatever had happened to Ava, and why Julia had never been told, was a secret so dangerous, so shameful, that it had been buried deep and deliberately left to rot in the dark. But not anymore. The letters felt almost too intimate to touch, wrapped in soft, aging ribbon and scented faintly of lavender and something older, ink, maybe. Julia untied them with hesitant fingers, half afraid they would crumble under her touch. There were about a dozen, all in the same elegant script she knew by heart, her mother's handwriting. The first one was dated August 1989, nearly a year before Julia was born. It opened not with a greeting, but a confession. Andrew, I know we promised not to write, but I can't bear the silence anymore. Julia's eyes froze on the name. Andrew. A name she'd never heard her mother say. Not in passing, not in bedtime stories, not once. And yet the way Caroline wrote to him felt raw, desperate, haunted by emotion. As Julia read on, the portrait of her mother, graceful, composed Caroline Whitman, began to fracture. The woman in the letters was vulnerable, passionate, terrified. Caroline spoke of stolen moments in hotel rooms, of love born in shadows, of whispers over the phone when no one else was listening. But as the letters continued, the tone shifted. Joy turned to fear, fear to sorrow. They found out. My father, he knows. He says I've humiliated the family, that I'm to say I've been ill, that no one must know. Julia's breath hitched, her stomach turned. She flipped to the final letter, dated only weeks before Ava's birth. They won't let me keep her, Andrew. I begged, I screamed. They say it's done, that I'll wake up and she'll be gone, and it will be like she never existed. The paper trembled in Julia's hands. Caroline's tears felt etched into every line. This wasn't just a love story. It was a tragedy kept behind sealed boxes and silent dinners. And somehow, she had been born right after it ended. Andrew. A hidden child, a mother forced to pretend. Julia sat back, her mind spiraling. The attic box hadn't just held secrets. It held a second life, a version of her mother she had never known. And now, she had to ask herself something she never thought she'd have to. Who was Caroline Whitman, really? The knock on Aunt Lillian's door echoed like a warning. Julia hadn't seen her mother's estranged sister in over a decade, not since a bitter family feud that ended with Lillian's name erased from holiday lists and family photo albums. But if anyone knew the truth about Caroline's past, it would be her. Lillian answered with the wary gaze of someone used to ghosts showing up uninvited. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, but her cardigan hung loosely, and her eyes darted immediately to the envelope Julia held, the one containing Caroline's letters. "Why are you here?" Lillian asked, voice brittle. "I need answers," Julia said simply, "about Andrew and Ava." At the name, Lillian stiffened. She stepped aside. Inside, the living room was faded with age, but every surface was dusted, every book in place. Lillian poured them tea, her hands trembling slightly as she sat across from Julia. Then, slowly she began to talk. Not with bitterness, but with the exhaustion of someone who's held onto truth for far too long. "Yes, Caroline loved a man named Andrew," she said. "But he was off limits from the start, not just because he was married, though that was scandal enough, but because of who he was." Julia leaned in. "Andrew DeWitt," Lillian whispered. "From the DeWitt family. The same DeWitts who tried to take down your grandfather's company in the 80s. The same ones we weren't even allowed to say out loud at dinner." Julia's mouth went dry. The Whitmans and DeWitts had a rivalry that stretched decades. Business, politics, land deals. It was whispered about in town but never fully explained. Julia had always chalked it up to old money grudges. She never imagined her mother had fallen in love with the enemy. "She met him at a gala," Lillian continued. "Didn't know who he was at first. By the time she found out, it was too late. She was in love. And pregnant." Julia's heartbeat echoed in her ears. "Your grandfather saw the relationship as betrayal. Not just personal, but strategic. He said if word got out, it would ruin us. So he made her end it, and when she wouldn't," Lillian's voice cracked, "he forced her hand." A deep silence settled between them. Caroline paid a price for loving Andrew. "But she paid an even deeper one for being his child's mother," Lillian said softly. "You want to know why she never told you about Ava? Because Ava was a scandal. A scandal she was never allowed to mourn." Julia sat frozen. The affair wasn't just forbidden, it was explosive. A war between families had been buried beneath polite smiles and silent halls, and she was just now beginning to dig up the battlefield. The truth came slowly, like ice melting, painful in its clarity. After leaving Aunt Lillian's, Julia couldn't sleep. She sat up all night, staring at the birth certificate from the attic box and rereading Caroline's letters under the soft pool of lamplight. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Why didn't she fight harder to keep Ava? By morning, she had an answer, one far darker than she imagined. In the county archives, tucked away in a dusty cabinet under layers of bureaucracy, Julia found something chilling. A sealed record of guardianship transfer dated April 1990. No court hearing, no formal adoption, just signatures. One of them scrawled and uneven, barely legible. Caroline Whitman. The date matched exactly 1 day after Ava's birth. The discovery sent Julia back to Aunt Lillian, who, this time, didn't make her wait on the porch. They told her Ava had complications after birth, Lillian explained, voice thin, that the baby needed to be taken to a special facility. Caroline was still groggy from labor. They'd sedated her, intentionally. She didn't even know she'd given birth to twins. Julia blinked. Wait, they lied to her? They did more than lie. They took Ava. Your grandfather had already arranged everything. A private doctor. A couple waiting. And by the time Carolyn woke up, she was told Ava hadn't survived. Julia felt sick. She tried to get answers later, Lillian continued, but every door was slammed in her face. And your grandmother? She told her to forget, said, "We saved you from a scandal that would have ruined you." Caroline was broken. But she stayed quiet for years. Julia clutched the edge of the table to steady herself. So Ava wasn't simply given away. She was stolen under the guise of protection. And the Whitmans, pillars of the community, had buried the truth like it was a crime scene. Julia's heart ached for her mother. But more than that, for the sister who'd grown up without knowing her real name, without lullabies from Carolyn, without birthdays or memories or love. She stared at her phone for a long time that night, finger hovering over the search bar. Ava Walker. The name felt fragile and unfamiliar. But Julia knew one thing now with absolute certainty. Her sister was out there. And she deserved the truth. Tracking Ava down felt like chasing a ghost. Every lead Julia followed led her further into a maze of secrecy, until she finally came upon a foster care agency in a town 3 hours away, the last place Ava had been known to stay. The records were sparse, and the receptionist behind the counter barely looked up when Julia asked about a girl named Ava Walker. "She's not here anymore," the woman said without emotion, as if the name meant nothing. "Moved out at 18. That's when Julia realized how much had been hidden. Ava hadn't been adopted into a loving family. She'd been shuffled from one place to another, a name on a file no one bothered to remember. And yet, the more Julia pressed, the more she was led to a small apartment building just outside the city, where a woman with striking dark hair and sharp, calculating eyes answered the door. Ava Walker. Her face was all angles and defiance, a stark contrast to Julia's soft features. There was something about Ava that felt both familiar and foreign, as though their similarities had been fractured long ago by years of absence and unspoken truths. "What do you want?" Ava's voice was a mixture of caution and irritation. "I'm Julia. Julia Whitman. We're sisters." The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. Julia watched as Ava's face flickered with recognition and disbelief. "Right," Ava said flatly, stepping back from the door. "The Whitman family. The perfect family. You came all this way to tell me I'm related to some fairy tale image?" Julia didn't know how to answer. All she could see was the hard line of Ava's jaw and the bitterness in her eyes, a mixture of suspicion, anger, and something deeper. "I know you're angry," Julia said softly, "but I need you to hear me out. I found out the truth. Caroline, our mother, never meant for you to be hidden. She was forced to give you away. She didn't even know you survived." Ava's eyes darkened, a flash of pain crossing her face. "Spare me the tragic story," Ava snapped. "You don't know a damn thing about my life. I've been surviving for years. Without her, without anyone." Julia felt a pang of guilt. Ava's anger wasn't just misplaced. It was rooted in years of feeling abandoned, of knowing something had been taken from her, even if she hadn't known what. "I'm not asking you to forgive her," Julia said, her voice trembling, "but I can't do this alone. I need you. I need to know who I am, too. Because everything I thought I knew, it's all a lie." Ava's eyes flicked to the side, as if searching for the right words. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice rough but steady. "I'm not your sister. Not the way you think. I'm a ghost in your life. A forgotten mistake. You want to fix that? You can't." Julia stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of Ava's words settle like stones in her chest. But before she could reply, Ava turned her back, walking into the apartment and closing the door with a finality that echoed through the cold hallway. Julia stood there for a long time, staring at the door. It was as if Ava had rejected her, rejected the truth of their shared history. But Julia wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when she had come this far. She would find a way to make Ava see the truth, that they were more than the sum of their broken pasts, that they were sisters, and that no amount of time could erase what had been stolen from both of them. The phone call came late, just as Julia was beginning to believe she would never fully uncover the truth. It was a simple message, left on her voicemail. "This is Dr. Hansen. We've received the results of the DNA test you requested. You need to come in." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Her mind raced as she drove to the clinic the next day. She thought about everything that had led her here, the birth certificate, the letters, the whispers of betrayal, and then about Ava. Their first meeting had been a clash of raw emotions, each word between them an attempt to bridge a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. But that didn't matter now. The test results would be the key. When Julia entered the office, Dr. Hansen was waiting for her, a folder in hand. He greeted her with a quiet but professional nod, his eyes serious. "Miss Whitman," he began, his voice steady, "the results are conclusive. Ava Walker is not just your half-sister, she's your twin." The word hung in the air, absurd in its enormity. Twin. For a moment, Julia felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Twin. They shared more than just a name. More than just blood. They were the same in a way she could never have imagined, and yet they were worlds apart. "I don't understand," Julia whispered, her hands trembling as she took the envelope from him. "How is this possible? Why would no one tell me? Why would she never know?" Dr. Hansen sat down, folding his hands in front of him, his gaze sympathetic but unyielding. "Your mother, Caroline, had no idea. She was never told the truth. After the birth, they kept her sedated, and the baby was taken before she could even form a bond. Ava was hidden away, her existence erased. No one ever told her about you, Julia, or about the other child she had." Julia could barely process the weight of the revelation. But what hit her hardest was the thought of Ava, growing up alone, never knowing the truth of her origin. What kind of life had she led, with no sense of connection to anyone? "Does she know?" Julia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Ava, does she know she's my twin?" Dr. Hansen shook his head. "She only knows what she's been told. That she was abandoned, raised in foster care, with no real family. No one ever told her there was another child out there." Julia stood in the sterile, cold room, feeling the enormity of everything she had learned, everything she had lost without even knowing it. Twin. She wasn't alone. She had a sister. A sister she'd never met, never known, and now, it seemed, she had a chance to finally understand everything. But with the truth came the weight of a responsibility Julia wasn't sure she was ready for. What if Ava never wanted to be found? What if their past was too much to face, too much to reconcile? The air in the office felt thicker now, suffocating with unanswered questions. Julia's thoughts swirled, as fragmented as the shattered pieces of her life. Suddenly, the weight of Caroline's silence hit her with full force. Her mother had hidden this from her for so long. Twin. All these years, and the person who should have been by her side, the one person who could have understood her most, had been kept in the shadows. Julia could hear the words her mother had once said, the warnings, the pleas. "We don't speak of that part of the past. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not anymore. She had to face Ava again. Had to tell her the truth. Had to confront a past that Caroline had buried so deeply it had become almost unrecognizable. But was Ava even ready for this truth? Was Julia prepared for the storm it might bring? The door to the clinic swung open, and Julia walked out into the bright sunlight feeling both liberated and trapped, as if she were standing on the precipice of a world she didn't know if she was ready to enter. Her twin was out there, and now the truth would find them both. The truth had been building, layer by layer with every discovery Julia made, but now, standing in front of Caroline, her mother, the woman who had once seemed unshakable in her grace and poise, Julia felt the weight of it all threatening to crush her. It was Mother's Day, the day Julia had planned to honor Caroline. Now, it had become the day of reckoning. There would be no celebration. Not yet. The family's legacy, the image of perfection that Caroline had so carefully curated, was about to unravel. Julia had come to this confrontation armed with the knowledge of Ava's existence, the truth of their shared blood, and the deep, undeniable betrayal that had been hidden for years. But none of it prepared her for the sight of her mother's face when Julia presented the DNA test results. "Mom," Julia began, her voice tight with emotion, "I know the truth. Ava, she's my twin. You didn't just give up a child. You gave up me." Caroline froze, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the kitchen counter. Her face went pale, as if the words were physically draining the color from her skin. I don't know what to say," Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to find out." The air in the room felt like it was pressing in on Julia. She wanted answers, but the weight of Caroline's gaze, the years of love and betrayal wrapped in that one look, made it hard to breathe. "Why, Mom?" Julia's voice cracked as she spoke. "Why would you hide this from me? From us? You've lied to me my whole life. You let me grow up thinking I was your only child. And now, I find out I have a sister who's been kept in the dark, just like me. Why?" Caroline closed her eyes, as if preparing for the storm that was about to break. When she spoke again, her voice was shaky, raw. "It wasn't my choice, Julia. None of it was." Caroline's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't wipe them away. "Your grandparents, my parents, they made me do it. They forced me to give Ava up. They didn't want the Whitman name to be tarnished. Not by an affair, not by a child who wasn't perfect." Julia's stomach churned as she processed the confession. Her grandparents, the people she'd revered as pillars of their community, the ones who had taught Caroline to conceal everything in the name of family pride, were the ones responsible for her life being shattered. The one thing that was meant to bring her comfort, the thing that made her feel safe, was built on lies. "Who was he, Mom?" Julia's voice was low, but her words sliced through the air. "Who was the man? The one you had the affair with? Who was he?" Caroline's face twisted in pain, but the answer came, despite the anguish that etched every line of her features. "Andrew Walker," Caroline said quietly. "He was a businessman, but more than that, he was tied to a family that wanted to ruin the Whitmans. A rival family. They had their own agenda, and I was the casualty." Julia's heart skipped a beat. Walker, Ava's last name, the name she had never thought twice about until now. "Andrew Walker was married," Julia breathed, her mind reeling. "So he was the man who... he was the one who tore us apart." Caroline nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "Yes. I thought I was in love with him. He promised me a future, a life together, but I was just another pawn. Your father found out. He was furious, but he made me choose. He told me that I had to give up the child, give up Ava, or our family would be ruined. And I couldn't lose everything. I couldn't lose you." The room felt cold as Caroline's confession hung in the air. Julia stood frozen, her thoughts scattered, torn between outrage and sadness. Her mother's words were like shards of glass, cutting through the image Julia had of her, the strong, graceful woman who always seemed to have everything together. "But you didn't just give up Ava," Julia said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave up me too. You kept me in the dark. You kept us both from knowing the truth." Caroline's shoulders sagged, her hands gripping the counter for support as she slumped in defeat. "I thought I was protecting you, Julia. I thought if I kept everything hidden, I could keep our family intact. But it's all been a lie, a terrible lie." The words hit Julia like a punch. A lie. a lie that had been woven into the very fabric of her existence. The mother she thought she knew had been living a different truth, a truth that had never been meant for her to see. As Caroline's sobs filled the room, Julia felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to reach out, to comfort the woman who had given her life, but another part of her recoiled, betrayed by the very foundation of her past. "There's one more thing, Julia," Caroline said, her voice breaking through Julia's thoughts. "The night I gave birth, I was drugged. My mother, my own mother, forced me to sign the adoption papers while I was unconscious. She made sure Ava was taken from me, and I didn't even get the chance to hold her." The weight of Caroline's final confession hit Julia like a storm. Her own mother had been manipulated by her own family, and that betrayal ran deeper than she could ever have imagined. "I'm so sorry," Caroline whispered, her tears falling freely now. "I never wanted this for you, for either of you." Julia didn't know how to respond. Her world had been flipped upside down in the span of just a few minutes. But one thing was clear. The secrets buried in their family had been too great to ignore any longer. The silence in the room was deafening. Julia and Ava stood side by side, the truth they had unearthed hanging heavily between them. The revelations of the past few weeks had shattered everything Julia had known about her family, but now, the darkest part of their history was coming into focus. With Caroline's confession still fresh in their minds, Julia and Ava had found something even more damning. Documents that tied the Whitman fortune to something far more insidious than simple family pride. The Whitmans had built their empire on secrets, and those secrets had always been more dangerous than anyone had realized. As Julia scanned the pages before her, ledgers, contracts, and testimonies hidden away in the Whitman estate's private archives, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The family's wealth, their success, and the very name she had carried with pride were tied to an illegal adoption ring. The kind of transaction that wasn't about giving children a better life, but about preserving a name, a legacy, at any cost. These documents, Julia said, her voice trembling as she stared at the evidence. This can't be real." Ava, who had been silently watching Julia's reaction, leaned in. "It is real," she said, her voice hard with determination. "The Whitman name was built on the backs of people like us, people they used and discarded when it was convenient. My adoption wasn't about shame, Julia. It was about profit, about securing the future of your family, no matter who got hurt in the process." Julia turned the pages in her hands, each one revealing more about the secret operations her grandfather had run under the guise of philanthropy. The family had been involved in an underground network that brokered children from struggling parents, promising them a better life in exchange for high sums of money. But the reality was far darker. Children like Ava, and possibly others, had been treated as commodities, moved across states, hidden in the shadows, so the Whitmans could keep their hands clean while filling their coffers. "This wasn't just about Ava," Julia murmured, more to herself than to Ava. "This was a system they created to maintain their status, to stay untouchable." Ava's eyes hardened. "I was just one of the pieces. But I wasn't the only one they stole from. My mother was a pawn in this too, so were so many others." She paused, her lips pressing into a tight line. "And now, it's all coming out. Not just to us, but to the world." Julia swallowed hard, trying to process the truth that had been right in front of her all along. Her mother's fear, her guilt, the careful shielding of their family's secrets. It all made sense now. The Whitmans had done more than protect their reputation. They had built their entire empire on the exploitation of others. "What are we going to do with this?" Julia whispered. "We can't just let it sit here. This is too big." Ava met her gaze, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. "You're right. This changes everything. Your family's legacy, the Whitman legacy, was built on lies, and it's time the world knows what they really are." The two women stood there, the full scope of their discovery sinking in, but their plan to expose the truth would not be easy. It was one thing to confront Caroline, who had been a victim of her own family's manipulation, but to go after the Whitman name, the empire that had been cultivated through decades of control and deceit, would take more than just uncovering the past. It would take everything they had. "Do you think she knew?" Ava asked, her voice quiet but filled with doubt. Julia nodded slowly. "I think my grandmother knew, and I think Caroline knew more than she let on. But she was just trying to protect us. From the truth, from the legacy she couldn't change." The quietness that followed was heavy. They both knew that exposing the Whitman family for what it truly was would come with consequences. Caroline had already lost so much. How much more was she willing to sacrifice for the sake of redemption? Ava looked at the papers one last time. "If we do this, there's no going back." Julia closed her eyes, the weight of their decision settling in. "No," she said, her voice firm. "But we have to. We owe it to the people who were hurt. And to us. To know the truth." The two women knew that in this moment, they were no longer just victims of their family's lies. They were the keepers of the truth. A truth so powerful it had the potential to unravel everything. But at the same time, it was the only thing that could set them free. And so, with one final decisive look at each other, they made their choice. Mother's Day had always been a day for celebration in the Whitman household. Caroline had spent years cultivating the perfect image of family unity, the kind that was admired, envied, and looked up to in their tight-knit suburban community. But this year, nothing was the same. The truth about the Whitman legacy was no longer hidden, and what should have been a day of honoring mothers became a stage for confronting the darkest secrets of their past. As the family gathered for what was supposed to be a festive brunch, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The sprawling Whitman estate was filled with guests who were oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. But for Julia and Ava, the weight of the truth they had unearthed could not be ignored. They had both come to terms with the fact that everything they thought they knew about their family had been a carefully constructed lie. Caroline, sitting at the head of the table, seemed to have aged in the past few days. Her eyes, once bright and full of control, were now shadowed with guilt. She had done her best to shield her daughters from the truth, but now, in the presence of her family, the masks she'd worn for decades felt paper-thin. Julia glanced at Ava, her twin sister. They had both decided to confront Caroline together, but what happened next would alter the course of their lives forever. "I'm so glad we could all be together today," Caroline said, her voice shaking ever so slightly. The smile she tried to muster didn't reach her eyes. Ava's eyes narrowed. She couldn't hold it in any longer. "Glad to be together? After all the lies, Mom? After everything you hid from us?" Her words cut through the air, loud and sharp, making every head at the table turn toward them. Julia's heart raced. "What are you talking about?" Caroline asked, her face turning pale. She knew, deep down, that her past was about to be exposed, but she hadn't expected it to be like this, on the very day meant to celebrate her. She turned to Julia, pleading with her silently, but Julia stood her ground. "This isn't about the brunch or the gifts or the fake smile you've perfected over the years," Julia began, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "This is about a secret that's been buried for far too long. A secret you tried to keep hidden from both of us. A secret that affects everything we thought we knew about who we are." The room was dead silent. Caroline's lips trembled, her eyes flickering with fear, but she knew there was no running from the truth any longer. "Ava, I never wanted you to know. I thought I could protect you both from the truth. But it was never meant to be this way." Caroline's voice cracked, her gaze shifting from Julia to Ava. "You weren't supposed to find out. You weren't supposed to know." Julia, feeling a surge of anger mixed with heartbreak, interjected. "The truth that you weren't the only child? The truth that you hid my twin sister? The truth that our entire family fortune was built on the backs of people like Ava?" Ava's voice was low, but filled with fury. "The truth that I wasn't just abandoned. I was stolen from my family, traded like an object. My adoption wasn't just some secret shame you kept. It was a transaction. A deal your father made so he could keep his empire clean." Caroline's shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had just crushed her. She had never been prepared for this moment, when the truth would come crashing down on her family. She had thought that keeping the secret, protecting the Whitman name, was the right thing to do. But now, as the anger in her daughter's voices filled the room, she knew she had failed them both. "Caroline," Julia said, her voice barely above a whisper, the words carrying years of unspoken pain. "Why? Why did you do this? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell us?" Tears welled in Caroline's eyes as she took a deep breath. "Because I loved you both more than anything in this world, and I knew the moment you found out the truth, everything would change. It wasn't just about protecting you from the outside world, it was about protecting you from each other, from the pain, from the betrayal. I couldn't bear to see you both hurt." Ava stepped forward, her expression a mixture of sadness and anger. "You didn't protect us, Mom. You buried us under lies, under shame. You kept us in the dark while you lived your life, and now we have to live with the consequences." Julia reached for Ava's hand, squeezing it tightly. They were both hurting, but they weren't alone anymore. The ties that had once been hidden by their mother's choices now bound them together. The weight of their shared history, painful and complicated as it was, no longer felt like a burden they had to carry alone. Caroline wiped her eyes, her voice shaking as she looked at her daughters. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I couldn't bear to lose you both. It wasn't just about hiding a mistake. It was about protecting the family we had left." Ava met Caroline's gaze, her eyes filled with something unexpected. Compassion, perhaps, or understanding. "You did lose us, Mom. You lost us a long time ago when you chose the family legacy over us. But you can't fix it now. The damage is done." The air in the room felt thick with the weight of all the unsaid words, the unresolved pain. But Julia knew one thing for certain. She and Ava would never go back to the way things were. They would no longer allow themselves to be defined by the legacy their mother had tried so desperately to preserve. As the storm of emotion swirled around them, Ava stood tall. "I'm not doing this for revenge," she said, her voice steady. "I'm doing this because it's time for the truth to come out. For everyone to know what the Whitman family really is." "Are you sure?" Caroline asked, her voice desperate now. "Are you really ready to burn everything down? Everything we've worked for?" Ava's gaze never wavered. "I'm not burning it down, Mom. I'm freeing us from it." The final blow was dealt when Ava, with cold resolve, revealed her plan. "I'm contesting the estate, not for revenge, not for money, but to make sure no more secrets stay buried, to ensure the Whitmans pay for what they've done." Julia could only watch as the weight of those words landed, not just on her mother, but on the entire family. The empire built on lies was crumbling before their eyes, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it now. As Mother's Day came to a close, what was supposed to be a day of gratitude and love had become a reckoning. The Whitman legacy, once a symbol of success and power, now lay in ruins. And as Julia and Ava walked out of the room together, their bond stronger than ever, they knew that from this day forward, nothing would ever be the same.